excuse me, comes from Exodus chapter 19, verses 3 through 8. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So we are going to be, this week and next week, we're going to be discussing covenant. And as I thought about that word, covenant, I thought of another word. Can you put that up for me, Matt? Anybody know what that word means? Anybody even know how to pronounce it? It's a fear of something. Very good. Phobia. That's always an easy part to guess. It is pronounced epistemophobia. It is the fear of knowledge. You might like it better if I say it this way. Ignorance is bliss. Right? I mean, isn't that what it's saying? That's what this word is basically saying. Ignorance is bliss. Because we have this mentality that if we don't know it, we don't have to be accountable for it. We're not responsible. Well, if I don't know it, I'm not accountable. I'm not responsible for it. I liken it to, say you are going to a foreign country and you are driving there. And you break a law over there that is not familiar to you while living here in the United States. Are you still going to get pulled over? Are you potentially going to still get arrested? Yes, you are. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean you're not in trouble for it. And so I feel like I need to help everybody understand the word covenant. One of the problems with the English language is it's not very pretty. It's not very descriptive. It's not a lovely language. It's kind of a garbage language, honestly, because it takes bits and pieces from all sorts of other languages and throws them together. And that's why, actually, if you're learning another language, English is one of the worst ones. So this year, I decided to do something a little different for myself. I'm not saying it's a New Year's resolution, it's just something I decided to do this year. I am currently working on better understanding Greek and Hebrew. That's the language that the Bible was originally written in, along with Aramaic, but I'm not touching that one yet. But the word that we get Hebrew, or that we get covenant from, the Hebrew word, berieth, the root of the word covenant in Hebrew is cutting, which is really weird until you understand where that all comes from. You see, when you had a deal, I mentioned it briefly last week. When a couple of people get together to make a deal, it would have been men, of course, back then, to seal it, to make it relevant, to make it real, they would have an animal. They would take an animal, usually something a little larger, maybe a sheep or a cow or something like that, and they would cut it in half. It gets grosser. Then, these two people that were creating this agreement, this covenant, would stand in the middle of the two cut sections, and all those goodies that are spilling out, and in essence shake hands. They were sealing the covenant the promise in blood. And that's where we get the word covenant. And that's why we talk about a blood covenant. You see, it was something serious. It was something intentional. It wasn't a casual promise. We have to remember that these people did not have a lot of livestock. So if they were going to be they weren't going to be chintzy about just cutting one of their animals in half. It was going to be serious. It was going to be intentional. You see, when they made a promise, they made it for real. The problem is, we treat promises a little too casually nowadays, don't we? I mean, let's be honest. We do. How many of you, when you had little kids, or maybe when you still have little kids or grandkids, I promise I will not eat the Reese cups out of your Halloween bag? And how many of you had peanut butter on your breath the next day? Parent tax doesn't count. But the idea is we treat our promises casual, and we joke about that one. You know, we say it's a parent tax or something like that. But what about a different type of promise? What about standing in front of a church with a loved one and promising to be with them for forever? The marriage covenant. Now, granted, I will say sometimes divorce is necessary. Don't get me wrong. I'm never saying divorce is never an option. But very often, it seems in this society, in this world, there's always an out already set up. There's already a plan if it fails. And if you're going into a covenant, a marriage, a promise, already planning a way out or planning accordingly, if it doesn't work, then you haven't fully committed to it. You need to go into it with the focus, with the intent that it's not going to fail. I'm going to focus on doing exactly what needs to be done, what needs to happen to make this work. You need to commit. I had a professor, I take classes through the United Methodist Church, and I had a professor who we were discussing different sermons that we had given. And of course, we had a room full of pastors, so we all had opinions about that. And one guy was talking about all of the research he had done and how he had gone. I mean, he had learned some different Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek. I mean, this guy blew me away how intelligent this guy was. And the sermon he gave, and I mean, it was passionate. It was this beautiful sermon that he was all talking about. And he got done and sat down, and the professor said, "So what did you ask them to commit to?" And the pastor said, "What?" He said, "What did you ask them to commit to?" He said, "Every time you preach, you should ask your congregation to commit to something." Now, I was glad he didn't ask me that question, to be perfectly honest, because sometimes I give sermons and I forget to ask you guys to commit to something. But shouldn't we? Shouldn't we commit to something? Because we have the attitude. We come in, we do this worship thing, expecting to leave unchanged. We want to feel better, but we don't want to change. We want to feel good, but we don't want to have to adapt. God always calls us to something deeper, more intentional, a stronger connection, a stronger commitment. He always does. But we don't want to deal with that. We don't want to handle that. We don't want to be intentional about that because, again, that requires change. And we've talked about that before. None of us likes to change, especially as we get older. We don't want to change. But we need to. We need to commit. If you have been baptized, if you have become a member of this church, you are under a covenant. And remember what I talked about? Even if you don't realize you are, you're still held responsible for it. So what are you committed to? You know, this time of year, we have a lot of people dealing with New Year's resolutions, right? And here we are on January 9th. And how many of those resolutions are already broken, right? We promise, we commit ourselves to something, and then it falls to the wayside. And we don't lose a whole heck of a lot of sleep over it. Because, it's just a little promise. It was just a promise to myself. That was 9 days. They say that the biggest upsurge in gyms and churches is in January. I saw somebody had posted, I'm going to start a new gym, and I'm going to call it New Year's Resolutions, and it's going to have gym equipment all of January. It's going to be a bar the rest of the year. Because that's the attitude, isn't it? And this covenant with God is so much deeper, so much bigger than that. This isn't a month long, this is a lifelong commitment. Intentional. It should be about being willing to change. You know, we sang a little song a little earlier. And the words say, "Whom shall I send?" And you all sang, "I will do it if you lead me." Did you just say the words or did you mean them? Because remember, you're not supposed to lie in church. Did you mean them? Did you mean those words? You see, when we commit to something, when we make a lifelong promise, we can't get out of it when it gets uncomfortable, when it becomes too hard, too rough. Sometimes you need to, if there are certain situations that call for that. But this is not one of them. It's like having a doctor's appointment. You ever had a doctor's appointment and, oh man, I completely forgot about it. Darn it. Does the doctor call and check on you? No. Just charges you a fee because you missed your appointment. And that's it. It's a little bit different when you have a kid and they don't show up. As a parent, do you just write them off? Well, no big deal. We got another one. No, you look after them. You seek them out. It's a lifelong commitment. It doesn't matter how old that kid gets, you check in on them. It's a commitment made in blood. We need to be intentional about that. We need to focus on what this commitment means, what a covenant really means. And unless there is commitment, there are only promises and hopes. There are no plans. God is not going to use you if you are not committed. I've heard people say, well, I pray to God and I want Him to use me. And the question is, are you committed to it though? Because sometimes when you're not committed, all you hear is static because life has gotten in the way. God, I want you to use me, but only on the weekends. God, I've got a schedule to keep. If you can work yourself around the schedule, I'm all yours. We need to commit. And part of that extra commitment is, as a church, we need to be committed. We need to be serious and intentional about what we're doing. You know, we look at the scripture here in Exodus. And Moses went down and he said to the people that God had said, you've seen how I've basically taken care of you. Now obey me fully and keep my covenant. Then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. And he took that down to the leaders. And what did they say? As a people, they said, we will do everything the Lord has said. Do you know this is like that was at least the second covenant God made with people, and I think we're on the fourth or the fifth, maybe. What does that tell you? The people done screwed up the covenant again. People aren't reliable. But that doesn't mean God keeps turning away from us, does it? He keeps coming back. So the covenant issue is not with God, it's with us. It's with our lack of commitment. Looking at 1 Peter. I love this, where it talks about, I am building you up like living stones being built into a spiritual house. Think about this. You got a nice house, and all of a sudden, 4 bricks decide, you know what, I'm not into this anymore, and they leave. You're not going to have a real stable house, are you? And that's what happens when not everybody in a church within, and when I say church, I'm talking about the universal church, all of us together. If a few of those step out, that can cause a collapse. That can cause issues. So we need to commit. We need to be intentional about our connection, not only with God, but with each other. Are we willing to commit? To help kind of make connections with that. Next week, at the end of service, I'm going to lead us through what's called a baptism reaffirmation, or remembering your baptism. So when you come in, I'm not sure where I'm going to put them, but I'm going to have a bunch of little cups of water. If you want to be a part of that, you pick up one of the cups. And at the end of the sermon, we'll do a little bit of a baptism reaffirmation. Because of distancing and everything, I will not be actually baptizing each one of you, but I will bless the water before we start it. But here's the thing. If you're not ready to commit, don't pick up one of those waters. Don't do it. I'd rather you be completely and totally honest and say, I can't commit to that. Or I'm not ready to commit to it. Or I need to understand it better before I commit. I will have so much respect for you if you do that. Honestly. I want you to be serious about this. If you're going to commit, I want you to commit. And if you take part in the service, I'm going to be watching. Because I'm going to be approaching people. Because we're going to be doing something this year. I don't know what God's going to do with us yet. I have things I want him to do, but, God doesn't always check in with me on his plans. We're going to be intentional about it. I want each one of you to honestly pray about it this week and decide, am I going to commit? Let's bow our heads.